Thrash is home to almost all of the biggest names in metal. You have Metallica, Megadeth, debatably Pantera if you want to stretch the definition a little bit. Thrash is one of the most mainstream, quote, true metal genres out there. However, due to its overwhelming popularity, there are quite a few albums and bands that are considered standard, and it can be kind of tricky to know where you're supposed to start in the genre. So hopefully this video will help you both get started in understanding the genre and fending off rabid thrash fanboys who will antagonize you all your way through your journey into metal, if you will. As sad as it is, the thrash scene is as notorious as the death and the black metal scene for being obsessed with being a true fan, and will pounce on almost anyone who they deem unworthy of the term metalhead. I think this video is both a starting guide for getting into thrash the genre, and a survival manual for dealing with the fans. Firstly, and most obviously, let's start with the big four of thrash. Again, as perhaps obvious as it is, I'd be remiss to skip over them in an introductory video to thrash. In case you aren't aware, the Big Four is an unofficial title given to the four most popular and influential thrash bands in the genre: Slayer, Anthrax, Megadeth, and Metallica. All four of these bands are pretty much standard metal, regardless of what subgenre that you consider yourself mainly a fan of. And having at least a casual understanding of these bands' careers and discographies is almost a prerequisite in the mind of many for being a metalhead. Note, all these bands pretty much abandoned thrash in the 90s, so if you're going to be listening to them for the point of getting into thrash as a genre, I recommend mainly sticking to their 80s stuff. That isn't to say you shouldn't listen to their 90s work. They have plenty of great albums from this decade, it's just that isn't really thrash. And so if you're trying to get into thrash, stick to the thrash albums. After that, we get into what is sort of referred to as the second wave thrash scene. These are the bands that were inspired mostly by the Big Four. Surprisingly, most of the bands on this list are actually older or as old as the Big Four and weren't inspired by them, but rather they were unable to put out an album until after the Big Four was able to. And so they're kind of considered part of the second wave, even though they really aren't. Almost all the thrash bands of the 80s really can be considered part of this movement, but these are the three that really stand out as being the most popular and, for the most part, the best of the second wave. Overkill, Testament, and Exodus. Ironically enough, in Exodus's case, their album was actually recorded in time to be part of the first wave. They could have been part of the first wave, and had they been part of it, they probably would be part of the Big Four. However, their release was delayed by a year, pushing it back to 1985. Regardless, though, these still are the three biggest bands, probably, of the entire thrash underground. While the Big Four certainly are the most influential and popular, these are the three bands that people mostly like to obsess over. They may lack the crossover appeal of the Big Four, but the quality of their music stands side by side of that of the Big Four. Next up, we have what are usually called the Teutonic thrash bands from Germany: Sodom, Creator, and Destruction. Thrash was largely an American phenomenon, but three bands from Germany managed to break into America and create legacies bigger than 90% of their American thrash peers. These bands are often credited with helping spur on the death metal movement, along with Slayer, really, and sort of proto-death metal themselves. They certainly are on the heavier side of thrash, and admittedly are probably not the best place to start with the genre, but their popularity, quality, and historical importance are undeniable. And at this point, pretty much knowing about them is really important to the thrash scene, even if you aren't a fan of the band themselves. Lastly, somewhat maybe controversially, I have Sepultura. Sepultura is undoubtedly one of the most popular thrash metal bands out there, but they're also one of the most hated. But if you ask me, again, their importance and their popularity and their quality is far too great to ignore for an introductory list. Beneath the Remains, Arise, Chaos AD, and Schizophrenia all rank among the best thrash metal albums out there, period. And they were very important in keeping thrash metal alive, even if just in the underground for the most part, during the early 90s. They would soon switch over to a sort of alt-styled groove sound during the, I think after 1994. I think that's whenever Roots came out. But they still created some of the best thrash around before that point. Again, they are often met with equal amounts of scorn as praise, but having some sort of opinion on Sepultura is pretty much mandatory at this point for being an active member in the thrash scene. Just as with my introduction to a metal video, this introduction to thrash video is by no means a comprehensive list. These are just a few of the hundreds, if not thousands, of awesome bands out there just waiting to be listened to. This is just a jumping off point. From here, listen to whatever you want. Explore, share whatever you find. That's what being part of the metal subculture really is about at its core, sharing music. Don't just listen to lists, find music on your own. Go to Metal Encyclopedia, hit the random band button, click on some random YouTube link of an album art that looks like shit. Do whatever you want, listen to music, and share it. That being said, I am more than happy to make more videos further exploring obscure bands and the sort. If you have any kind of recommendations for videos, disagree with anything I've said, think I left out a band, etc., feel free to leave a comment down below, and I will be sure to respond to it or ignore it, one of those two things. On that note, rock on and other stereotypical metal sayings that have not been cool since the 80s.